Perfect. All good.
We're live.
We are.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and especially thank you very much to Josie for giving up your time tonight. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of these webinars dealing with physio aspects and bike fit aspects of dealing with cyclists, but a really, really important one is obviously when it comes to the psychological management of injuries and how we can support our clients dealing with injuries. Maybe that's why they've come to us for a bike fit, or they're coming to us as physios and needing maybe a little bit of extra support, or again identifying where there might be a client who needs onward referral to somebody like Josie for more specialist advice and support when it comes to dealing with injuries. I came across Josie a little while ago on social media, on Twitter, and it was one of my Olympic athletes actually who had been recommending her book, this one here, which was coming across really well. So I picked it up, and this is a fantastic resource, especially with the fact that, Josie, you put in loads of really actionable strategies to deal with a whole host of different things. But we're going to particularly focus on your chapter 9, and yes, I've highlighted and added in the margins because this is, an excellent resource that you've put together. So we'll spend a little bit of time this evening exploring this one. But before we do that, do you want to do a better introduction to yourself than I can do, and tell everybody sort of who you are, what your role is, and maybe again so where they can find out a bit more about you, and then we'll get cracking.
Sure. I'm Josie. I live in London. I actually spent the first 15 years of my career in communications, kind of doing lobbying and lots of crisis communications and PR campaigns, like some really fluffy stuff. But my sport was Ironman for a long time. I did lots of riding as well as part of that, National 100 and those kind of races. And in 2013, I went over to Australia to do the Melbourne Ironman. And I'd done all my training in nice, gentle swimming pools in London, and stood on the beach in Frankston where they do the swim, and the most horrific waves I have ever seen, and was utterly terrified. And I was just like, I can't do this. This is crazy. And the guy on the tannoy said, "You guys can't control those conditions. You can only control how you feel about them." And it was genuinely my light bulb moment of, oh yeah, I've been doing this sports stuff for 10 years now, and I've never clicked that if I used my brain a bit more, I could be a lot better. And I have no natural talent. Everything's just been like working hard. So I really needed that extra help. And it was proper light bulb moment of, oh yeah, I really could do this differently if I thought about it differently. And I got back to the UK and I really started researching it. And I wasn't happy in my job at the time. And so I decided to take a year off and go and do a master's in psychology and see where it would take me, and liked it. Then you have to do another master's in sport and exercise psychology. And then I discovered you have to do another 3 years of supervised practice. Hadn't planned for any of this before you're actually allowed to kind of really work on people. So yeah, I did all of that and then been running my business for a few years now. So I guess the book came about because when I was doing my master's, I really wanted kind of a how-to book, almost like the dummy's guide of how to do sports psychology, and nothing existed. There was nothing to say these are the main reasons people tend to go and see a sports psych, and there was nothing that kind of listed all the different techniques you might be able to use with somebody. So there's lots and lots of different books, but not in one place. And so I tried to write the book that I would have found really helpful. And so I guess I wrote it based at trainee sports psychs, but actually the people that seem to benefit most from it are coaches and physios who are working with athletes. And you guys get a lot more time with athletes than we ever do. We get like maybe once an hour every fortnight, every month, whereas actually we can have a lot more value if physios and coaches understand what's going on in someone's brain and how to get them to actually do their physio. All of that kind of thing can be really helpful. So hopefully it's been helpful outside of just the sports psych world.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's it. What you just said there about everything that you've written in your book here is applicable to all aspects of our roles as coaches, as physios, bike fitters, whatever that role is. And it's all part of that MDT, isn't it? And making sure that we're all speaking each other's languages. So understanding the work that you're doing with an athlete means that we can, again, sort of follow on and reinforce those same messages that maybe you've been putting into play. So yeah, I think so. If you haven't got it out, if you're watching this and you haven't got the book, I would thoroughly recommend picking up a copy of this. We'll stick some links in the comments afterwards. So I suppose just to kick off then is from your side of things, from the sports psychology side of dealing with an athlete who's picked up an injury, what's the sort of strategies that you go through or some of the actions that you go through to help an athlete deal with maybe the acute time period of picking up an injury?
So I have a 6-step approach that I will take an athlete through. The first stage is anger. So they are allowed to be as angry as they want, really hacked off, kind of throwing toys out the pram for 48 hours. And I don't know where this 48 hours came from, but it does seem to work quite well, that you give someone that opportunity to get that frustration out. Because it's not just an injury. Some of the time it means a cut short season or a race that you've spent months training for that's gone out the window.
Or 4 years.
Yeah, and I think cycling shows really well the difference in injuries. So you might well have the overuse, the overtraining injuries, the niggles that you've ignored that have become unignorable. But then in cycling, we get some really acute, horrible crash injuries as well. So the opportunity to get that frustration out there, really important. And then stage 2 is really getting as much information as you can about your injury or what's happened. It's kind of feeling really armed, that you know what it is likely to be, what might have caused it, what you might want to do differently next time. So you feel a bit more in control. And then it's go off and find the experts. So when you have a rough idea, then you can work out who you might need to go and see about it. And so that might be bike fitting if it's come about because you've had a niggle that you've ignored and you've not been set up properly. It might be a nutritionist and an endocrinologist if actually you've pushed yourself into overtraining syndrome, you've not fueled well enough. You might well have something like Red S. Might well be a physio for a huge number of other reasons. But when you've got that first bit of info, you go off and find the best people. And that might be your own research, but often we'll ask them to go and find recommendations. So who else in your club or that you train with, who have they seen that they'd really recommend? And then we do some goal setting. So just as we would do goal setting at the beginning of a season for what do you want to work on, we would do the same for recovery. And there's research that shows, I read somewhere like 70% of people don't do the physio exercises that they're supposed to do and that they're set. And then somebody the other day told me it'd gone up to 37% who do them. So maybe it's getting better, but that's still a huge number that spend the effort and time to go and see someone and then don't do it. And there might be psychological reasons for that. Sometimes there's a fear that if they don't work, we've lost all hope. So there are lots of reasons. But there's also research that shows when we do goal set recovery, then we can build things like that rehab and then prehab into our goals, and we're much more likely to do it. Because cyclists particularly seem to really love data, and they seem to love tick lists, and they love turning training peaks from red into green. And so if you're able to goal set in a way that means, yeah, I've got my physio session in my training peaks, I'm ticking it off, I know I've done it, that's really helpful. And then it's about, if you've got time off because you're injured, what else is there in your life? So the people I see struggle most mentally in sport are the people that if you cut their body in half, it would have their sport written through like a piece of rock. And so if you've got someone and they're just pure cycling, that's quite dangerous when they can't cycle. They've got nothing else left to quieten their mind or to cope with. And so we really want to help people build a wider identity. What else do you love doing? What else have you not had time to do in a while that you could do right now, so it wouldn't feel like you're wasting time, but you feel like you're still growing? And then the final one is about staying social. So actually, even if you can't train properly, still do the club Swift ride, but just soft pedal, or still go and meet everybody at the cafe stop on a Sunday, even though you've had to do a much slower ride there and back, so that you're still keeping that engagement and you still feel part of it. You don't feel like you're kind of cut off from your friends in your sport.
Yeah, there's some really good points there. It's that control element, isn't it? As you mentioned at the beginning there, with some of the cycling injuries we're picking up, these are things that have happened outside of our control. It's not necessarily that we've made a mistake or the coach has made a mistake. You know, it could be another rider comes down in front of you, go over the handlebars, boom, you're injured. And you just couldn't control that, could you? And you got the quote there, and again, I'm coming back to your book here, aren't I? I'm a bit of a sort of fanboy, aren't I? But, you know, we can't always control the situation, but we can control our response to it. So it's understanding, okay, this has happened. Yeah, great. We get angry for your 48 hours, but then it's what can we control? And it's then picking up that, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's some people, so as you said, someone comes down in front of you, there is nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
You can, though, practice how you get round crashes like that, or how you might ride slightly differently in future, so that you're not near people you don't 100% trust. So you can make slight tweaks, but there are some, probably quite a number of issues where people afterwards will know they shouldn't really have gone out on an icy day. They would have been much safer on the turbo, and yet they wanted to do the session that was set and they felt they had to follow it, and so they went out anyway. Or, yeah, I've actually had that knee niggle for weeks. I know I should have got someone to look at it early on, but I didn't, and now it's become something chronic. And so some analysis and some real honesty after that, in that moment of you get through the anger of the like, okay, what could I have done differently? Because there will usually be a few things you can tweak, and then at least you get a lesson from it for how to change things in the future. And I can see Amelia's put up a question about frustration, and frustration often comes when you don't feel in control of a situation. So when you are able to grasp a little bit of control back of how might I do this differently, or part of our goal setting might be, what will I do while I'm off? I've got 6 months where I'm not going to be able to race properly. Well, what can I do that means when I go back, I will be a better athlete? And that might be, yeah, actually, I'm going to do a load of swimming because it might strengthen something. I'm going to do a different type of exercise that keeps me strong. It keeps my muscles good. I'm going to do a load of mental strength work. So I've learned all those skills that I never quite got time to do before because I was actually on the bike. I'm going to practice those. So definitely working out which elements do I have control of. That's what I'm going to focus on right now.
Yeah.
Josie, with some athletes that, let's say, for example, Tim and I might see, or indeed coaches, if they're injured, do you encourage them to divert their attention to other sports, or do you try and get them to as well focus away from sport and onto other activities that might be perhaps like reading, arts, all that kind of thing? Or do you kind of judge that based on the individual?
It's all on the individual. And it depends why they cycle as well. So some people will cycle purely because they found they were good at it and they like winning races and that's their thing. And so for them, you're probably trying to find something else they're good at. For other people, they might just cycle for the social side. And so the important element for them is, well, how do you stay social? Is it that you go and do other things in a group? Is it that you spend more time on social media, engaging on cycling forums, but if you can find somebody's purpose for doing it in the first place, you can then almost stretch that purpose for other areas. If it's purely about fitness, then absolutely you'd find another sport that they could do. But and often there's something in their background that they've, I wouldn't say sacrificed, but they haven't been able to spend as much time as they used to as the cycling's got more important to them. It's an entirely different sport, but I interviewed a cricketer for a book recently, and I was actually interviewing him about injuries and setback. And last summer, he was playing football as their warm-up before a match and broke his leg. And so he had that whole summer where all his mates were playing, and he was able to go to the gym and do a little bit, but he never got to see them because by the time they'd finished their gym sets, they were all out on the field and he was there on his own, and he was really he was in a bad place with it. And he said he'd really sat down and said, look, I don't get enough time to go out to the pub with my friends because I have long matches. I always have to be, over the summer, I have to be in tip-top shape for the entire summer. We go off and we do tours for 2 months. I don't get to see them in the same way. So actually this year, absolutely, I'll do all my physio. I want to get back as quick as I can. But I'm going to have this almost as a year off, having to have that focus that he'd had since he'd been doing high-level cricket since the age of 13, I think. So for 10 years, he'd had that pure dedication to this is how I have to behave as a professional athlete. He was like, I'm going to give myself the summer off it. I'm not going to go out and get hammered every night, but I'll do the stuff that I used to enjoy that I don't get to do anymore. And actually it meant, bless him, he finally got back to it, and then COVID ruined everything. But it meant just he was getting back to it. He had a real craving to be back to it. He'd kind of got all of that stuff out of his system, and it's like, right, now I want to be a pro player again.
Mm.
So your strategies for us then, we've got an injured cyclist and they want to cycle and they're reluctant to do anything else. How would you best recommend we approach that situation?
So I guess it is that chat about what else, or why do you cycle?
Yeah. So
if it's for fitness, well then maybe you do a little bit, but there's no effort in there whatsoever. It's sitting on your bike and it's spinning your legs. If it's the fresh air, okay, then go for an hour's walk. But finding their thing and what pushed them into cycling in the first place.
So it's going back to Simon Sinek's start with why, isn't it? The sort of find your why.
My favourite book.
Yeah.
I'm utterly passionate about this.
I did that with my athletes this summer, obviously with everything getting cancelled, is well, go back to your why. Yeah.
It's really powerful. And I actually wrote a piece for Cycling Weekly on it over the summer around the COVID stuff, about this is an opportunity when we couldn't do what we were used to doing in the same way, to actually really go back to why we started cycling in the first place and how could we adapt what we used to do. Because we don't normally start out because we want to race really fast down an A road and get a sub 1 hour 25-mile time trial. That's not why anybody starts cycling. We start because we want to get fitter. It's a quicker way to get around. Our friends are going out. We have when we look back to it, we know why we started, and if we can recapture that a little bit. There was a brilliant group I chatted to. I feel really awful. I can't remember where they were from. Banbury. It was the Banbury Cycling Club, and they really loved cycling. Couldn't do what they used to do, but they loved the camaraderie they had through their club, and that was what they were missing. And so they set up during COVID a scheme where they would help deliver everything from the local pharmacies to people all over the area who couldn't get their medicines. And so the chairman of the club had set up this, who was going to do it when, and they had a rota, and it was amazing. And they then felt much more like part of the community. They felt like they'd built some bridges because there'd been a load of local drivers complaining about bike lanes and everything. So they felt they were giving lots back. And they had the camaraderie of, we're all doing something to help in this bigger thing. So they still used their bike in a very different way. Although they did say, please don't set any Strava records. We're really trying not to put any pressure on the NHS here. But obviously they had nice free roads to go out and ride on. But they used their why, and they shifted it a little bit so that they still got what they loved. And actually they had a really lovely experience through it, that they were really giving something back.
No, that's great. And I think the other thing, like you said before, about the finding other activities in their life as well. I mean, I've been injured a bit this year, so I've gone back to, I'm actually sat at the piano now. So I've been going back and playing the piano a little bit more, because I haven't been out doing the long runs that I would normally be doing. So I made a point of, with my athletes, when they're setting their goals for 2021, to also add in other sport related goals, to give them another focus outside of sport.
Brilliant.
So,
and there was a piece of research from the BBC a couple of years ago that said 50% of pro athletes, when they retire, get some level of depression. Because most of the time, that's what you've been training for from the age of 9 or 10. So you've got 20, 25 years of your thing that matters to you, really matters to you. That all your self-worth has been built into whether you win races, whether you feel like a bike racer. And overnight, that goes.
Yeah.
You go from, I'm a pro cyclist, to I'm a retired cyclist. And some pros find it very difficult to do their sport for fun, because you're continually measuring up to where was I before. And so it's the people that really prepare for it beforehand that do really well. I interviewed Liz Yellings, an Olympic marathon runner, and I interviewed her a few years ago about how she managed on retirement. She was like, I could not wait. She said, I'd already done a course at college in interior design, always wanted to be an interior designer. It'd always been at the back of my mind. So 3 or 4 years before I was about to retire, I did this course. I started prepping, and I knew what I wanted to do in my business plan. And so as soon as I knew that was my last race, I had something to jump into. I was really excited. And some athletes will see it as, I'm failing, or I'm expecting to fail by planning for this. And if I don't plan for it, it means I'm more likely to do well. But actually, it's the people that plan for it. And even for amateurs as well, it's very unusual to have a hobby your entire life. Stuff happens and your bike suddenly you find has been sat in the garage for a year. And so the more, we don't want to be too split, but the more parts we have to our personality. If you were sat in a bar, when we're allowed to sit in bars again, and you were chatting to somebody sitting there and they said like, oh, tell me about yourself. If you could only say, oh, I'm a cyclist, it's going to be a pretty short conversation unless they're also a cyclist. What else do you feel you are that you've got in touch with other people, or that kind of lights you up of like, yeah, I love this.
Yeah.
So thinking about Amelia's question then, we've got some good strategies for dealing with someone maybe who has been affected short term. What about someone carrying a long-term injury?
Yeah, that one's really tricky. And I'm always really interested when you talk to people about their injuries. Most will say they would rather have an injury that they knew was kind of sport ending, that was it was black and white, you cannot do it again, than have one that drags on and on and on for years and you never quite know, because you get the ups and downs and you get the glimpse of, oh, I'm doing all right, I'm coming back, and then something else will come up. And so I think over time it's a mindset change towards, maybe I'm not a cyclist, or I'm not a pure cyclist anymore. What else can I do? And a real, rather than this idea of mental toughness where we just blast our way through everything and head down and we're not gonna accept defeat. Actually, a more of an acceptance approach of, and it's a really nice theory in sports psychology called acceptance and commitment, where we look at the things that are really frustrating us, what's bringing that kind of chimp in our brain out, what really makes us over emotional, and that might well be a long-term injury, and accepting that it's there, not trying to forget about it, not trying to squash it away, not trying to fight it, of accept I have this injury, I don't want it, but I have it, so I have to deal with it. And then we move on to our values. What really matters to me in life? What I normally do is 3 things. And I've actually got a sheet on my website where you can download it, and it's got lots of different values, and you kind of cross them all off until you find the 3 that really are yours. Or another way of doing it is looking through your phone and looking through the pictures on your phone, and what kind of themes do the pictures on your phone bring to life? Because that can really sum it up. Like one of my values is clearly family, or it might well be cycling or sport or being active or moving or adventurous. But when you really understand your values, you then kind of use your values to override those frustrations of, well, I can't do this. But actually, if my value is being adventurous, getting really frustrated that I can't do it isn't helping. It's not moving me closer to that value of being adventurous. What else can I do that does move me more towards my value? And so that might be going on a different type of holiday, a holiday where you haven't got your bike packed up in a box, but you go on a trekking holiday, or you go on a swimming holiday, or you go and do something that still hits that value that matters to you, accepting that this sucks, I'd rather be on my bike, but at the moment I can't. Because the longer you fight something, the more difficult it is to deal with.
Yes, that fighting and not resisting whatever's going on. I think that's certainly, I can personally relate to that. And I've seen that a lot in patients over the years, that those who are not accepting it and they're fighting it will struggle a lot more than those who just go, okay, this has happened, this is what I need to try and deal with it. And Amelia, I can certainly relate to injuries that are lasting into the years, not just into the hours and days. But that's a story for another time. What about kind of psychological strategies for that getting back into training? So maybe the fear of re-injury, or again, probably links in with that sort of normalization of that sort of biofeedback, which is, I think, strategy number 15 in your book. So that sort of understanding those sensations of, is this my injury or is this normal? I'm scared of having the same injury again, and the sort of fear of that return to play or return to sport and training. What kind of strategies do you use with people for that?
So it's very rare someone comes to see me because they are injured. Most people can handle a first injury okay. So they might come if it's been long term and they're really struggling and they've got lots of anxiety or stress around that. But I do get quite a few people come because the fear of re-injury. They know, as Amelia's saying there, that frustration of something that flares up, or knowing, okay, I got through it the first time, but I missed 6 months and it hurt and it was so frustrating and I didn't know who I was in the middle of it all. It's that fear that's really, really strong. And some of it's biting the bullet and having to be really, really brave with going for it despite that fear. Again, you've got that acceptance. I accept that I'm worried about it. I accept that it could happen, but I will put everything in place to make sure it doesn't. So a strategy we'll use, not just for injury, but for any type of where we want to do a great performance in something. It's called what-if planning. So we'll get a sheet of paper, and down one side we put every single thing we are worried about happening. And I normally leave sheet on the page for about 12, but I've had somebody with 43. So 43 things that had come up that were like, these are all the things I'm worried about in my competition or in this season that worry me. And so that fear of re-injury or different elements of it, that I won't react well this time, that they've already given me one injection and they've told me I can't have another one. Those kind of things would be on that sheet. And then we look at, what do you do to prevent it happening? So I will do all of my prehab every day. I will make sure I actually warm up properly before I go out on my bike. I will not go out on my bike on icy days. So you might have those ways of preparing for whatever you're scared of. And then that final column is, if it happens, what will I do? Because when something horrible happens to us, particularly something we are looking out for because we're fearful of it, that kind of chimp, our amygdala, is immediately alerted, and our sensible, rational decision-making brain goes out the window, and our very emotional brain comes into play, and we make rubbish decisions when we're emotional. And so in that immediate moment of something going wrong, we panic and we make the wrong decision. Whereas if we've prepared for it in advance, we make the right decision because we know what to do and we've thought about it when we're in a sensible mode. So it could be, if I go out on the bike and my knee starts niggling, an emotional thing might be, I get off my bike, I lob it down the hill. A rational one would be, I will ride for 5 more minutes, see if it gets any worse. If it gets worse, I will call a cab and go home. But you've then got in place how you're going to handle it. That puts you back in control. And most of what we're looking for to keep our sensible head on is having that sense of control.
Yeah, I use that strategy even with kind of race planning as well.
Yeah.
Just think of everything that could possibly go wrong, have a strategy already in place, so when it does go wrong, there's no panic, there's no chimp, you just follow the script. But yeah, interesting.
My biggest fear in Ironman is a puncture, because you're so tired, you don't think straight. When you've been out there for 7 hours already and you're tired and it's boiling hot, and those people you've spent so long going past then speed past you, that really gets your amygdala and your chimp like right out. And so that is always in my what if planning before an Ironman. And then take that back to, okay, so how do I prevent a puncture? I put new tires on for that race. I only pump them up the morning of, so they're not going to explode in the sun, because often they're in very hot places. I will check them right before I go down to the swim. I will practice every night for a week before my race, whilst watching EastEnders, changing tires. So if it happens, I can do it super quick. And then if it happens in the race, I will take a gel, so I'm getting some energy in whilst I'm doing it. I will sit down so I get a rest and I don't get cramp, and I will do it slowly. And that, even if it never happens, the fact you've thought about it takes away the fear. It's like, I can handle it if it happens. So it's really good for anything in sport. Like, I've prepped it, I've planned for it. It's outside of sport too. Anything you've got going on, having that kind of preparation in place because you've ticked off the things that make you nervous. It's really good. And there's a lovely piece of research that they took students who were about to do a maths exam, and they got half of them to write down what was making them anxious beforehand. And it was just 15 minutes of scribbling down why they were nervous or worried about it. They didn't do anything as a result. They just wrote it down. And the other half just sat and chatted. The people that wrote down their nerves did 6% better than expected. And the people that chatted did 12% worse than expected. So just the process of writing down what we're worried about and those anxieties is helpful to our performance.
Yeah.
There's much to be said, I think, about the biopsychosocial model, certainly for us as therapists, Josie. But obviously, when you've got a client in who is going through an injury, when do you think it's like a good point to get you involved?
Usually when you can see they're a bit stuck. So if it's they're coming back Well, one, if they're clearly not doing their exercises, that can be a good time, because there might be a reason why. And so, someone messaged me the other day just through Twitter of they were writing an article about it, of, I know I'm not doing the physio in the way I should be. Could it be because I'm worried that actually this is my last hope, and if it doesn't work, I'm actually out, and so I'm almost dragging out this misery, but in a way of, I don't want that end game to come into place. And so when you can see that people might not be doing what they need to be doing to get better, or whether there's just a real frustration, and occasionally it might be people are doing very clearly the wrong things. And I did some research a few years ago on mental toughness in endurance athletes. And there were lots of cyclists in it. And we found that those with higher mental toughness, I thought they would get fewer injuries. They actually tended to get a few more. And I think it's because they are able to kind of see through the pain and deal with that pain in a way that doesn't impact them. And I interviewed some cyclists who had very high mental toughness and claimed never to have been injured. And they had all been injured. One of them limped out of the interview. Like, but you've never been injured. Like, oh, this isn't an injury. This is fine. And somebody else had come off on ice, cycling outside, and gone straight home with a broken arm and just on a turbo session instead to finish off the session. And so there can be a huge amount of mental toughness, which means you are able to ignore pain. And there's research that shows you can physically kind of lift more in more pain than somebody with lower mental toughness, which can make you a very good athlete. But it can also mean you don't recover in the way that you should. You don't follow advice in the way you probably should, and you push yourself too far. And that means you then get some of those really long-term injuries that put you out of it completely.
Yeah.
As a psychologist then, Josie, what do you define mental toughness as? What are the traits, the personality traits, etc.?
So extroverts have higher levels of mental toughness. Those who are conscientious tend to too, because you'll do whatever you're told. And so you tend to stick more to what a coach will tell you. Although I also saw in the research, they tend not to feed back honestly to their coach because they're worried their training might be dropped. So actually, if you have someone with high mental toughness, you need to communicate a lot more with them and really drill down whether they're really doing things. They will follow something like Training Peaks so religiously that you need to put their physio into Training Peaks, and they'll do it because it's a little green box to tick off. But also I've been looking at this difference at the moment between mental toughness and mental flexibility. And I think for injured athletes, actually what we should be helping them develop is not mental toughness. We don't want them sticking their head down and ramming their way through. We want them learning to be more agile and flexible with how they think. And I think that would help an awful lot of athletes anyway, because it helps you deal so much better with setbacks, that you can, it's not that you're shrugging things off, but you accept there's a setback and you put in place a really good quality coping mechanism to deal with it. You're more solution focused with your responses rather than just ignoring it.
So in essence, you have a choice. You have a couple of different paths that you can go down rather than just putting your head down and steamrolling ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's a good role that you guys can play. Of actually, we are awful, particularly in the cycling media, for really bigging up mental toughness, mental strength, and really making a big deal of it as if it's a good thing. And I'm absolutely guilty of that when I started. It sounded good when you're marketing. People want to read about it. We all want to be mentally tougher. And long-term for well-being and mental health, I don't actually think that's a very valuable place to be. So for elite athletes, for a short amount of time, absolutely, it might make you a great athlete, but you're going to have a comeback down to earth. And actually, I think those people have much more flexibility about how they behave, the approaches they take, not having to be so rigid in their thoughts, are people that will have much longer term careers in their sport, whether it's an amateur or an elite career. So I spend a lot of time with athletes now trying to make them more flexible. I know you physically make them more flexible. I try to make them more mentally flexible of how do we get you to break a routine occasionally? Because actually when we do exercise psychology with kind of everyday people, we're trying to get them into good habits, good routines. Often I find with athletes who are very dedicated and driven, they stick far too closely to routines and habits, and we need to help them be more flexible and break some of those. So if Monday morning is an absolute sufferfest doing 20 laps of Regent's Park before work, and actually that's harming them, we need to get them to break it and to be okay with breaking that. And so I will often do very small activities with somebody that helps break it. So a common piece of home, and I give homework to every client for every session. A common piece of homework might be go and do one session this week with no tech. And a lot of people will struggle with that. Or it might be, I want you this week to say no to something you always do. And it could be simple. It could be, I am not going to make the bed in the morning. I normally get out of bed and I shake out the duvet and I smooth it down and then I'm done for the day. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it messy. People will really struggle with that because it's part of your routine and you're used to, and it's part of our rigidity. Actually, when people are very driven, particularly if they've got perfectionism, which we see a huge amount of from people struggling, those are some really good habits to break and to give people the ability to do things a bit differently.
So just following up on Ian's message there about the sort of acceptance, and can these lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're sort of accepting that we've got this long-term injury, we're always going to have it. Maybe that gets sort of stuck in there.
Yeah, so we stop trying. I think the key to that not becoming self-fulfilling is the values element. And so we talked about start with why. When I work with clients long term, and it's not because we're trying to fix a specific problem, we're trying to make them an amazing athlete. It's because, and it's through this idea of you need to find your purpose, which feels very, very far outside of sport, but it all filters down. So it's the idea that when you are 90 and you are looking back on your life, what are you leaving behind? What was the value of you being here? What can you kind of go, okay, it's okay for me to go now because I did this. And it's incredibly powerful. So there's a wonderful lady I know who is 78. She does Ironman. She doesn't do it because she wants to be a great Ironman athlete. She does it because she wants other older people to be more active. And that's her purpose in life, to get more older people living more active retirements. And so that drives her on in every race. When she's injured, the drive is to get back to it. So she accepts she's got an injury. She'll go and do whatever she can to get fixed, and she'll do all the work because she knows she's got a really decent purpose to get back to. Not because she wants to go and do a specific time trial, but because if she does this, she develops that platform to talk wider. I interviewed a brilliant runner called Damien Hall, who does lots of crazy distance races, very fast, faster than most people in the world. And he did a race recently in, I think it was Wales. Yeah, and for him, it was only like 21 hours, which is fairly short. And I asked him what got him through the tough bits of it. Like when you're exhausted and tired and everything hurts and you want to quit, what made you keep going? And he was like, I had an acorn in my pocket. He said, me and my daughter, we have this thing about squirrels and we joke about squirrels and we buy each other little squirrels. And before I went off to do this new record, she gave me an acorn because that's what squirrels have. and I put it in my pocket, and whenever I was having a stress, I could feel that acorn, and I thought of my daughter, and I wanted to get back faster for her. And because it met a purpose, his daughter means the world to him, then he was able to overcome that difficult stuff and do what it took. And so acceptance absolutely isn't about giving up and kind of putting it aside. It might be over time because you discover other things you love or other ways to meet your purpose. But it's about, okay, this is where I am right now. Where do I want to be? Well, what am I going to put in place to get there? And how does it meet who I am, my values of who I am as a person? How does it meet my purpose? And then you can find a way through it that's very proactive rather than a lot of those frustrations or those ups and downs the whole time.
Josie, that kind of brings us nicely on to probably a recent article that I was going to bring up, and Tim, you might be aware of this as well. But there's a pro cyclist, Remco Evenepoel, who has said that with his recent injuries, he's really got a fear of gaining weight. And you've mentioned that you see quite a few, clients with eating, disordered eating. What's the kind of process behind approaching this, and are we qualified to deal with this, or should we be referring on to you?
To be honest, most sports psychs aren't even qualified to deal with it. We're not taught about properly about eating disorders at all in training. I've recently taken a diploma because I work so much with cyclists and runners, and I see so much disordered eating. It felt wrong to carry on and not really try and understand this area much more, because when you're working with someone who's got a disordered eating, we won't say eating disorders, but disordered eating covers probably more than half the population. It's a big group of people who aren't eating just to hunger or to satiation. They are eating through some specific rules that they have brought in, some element of I shouldn't look the way I do. And that might be through things like orthorexia, where you do overly clean eating. It can be something called RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport, where it's not always purposeful that you're eating less than you're exercising, but you're not fueling the vast amounts that you're doing. And so you get into a real deficit and you start losing weight. And we see female athletes will lose their periods, is a really good sign that something is very wrong. Male athletes, the first sign you normally see is stress fractures. And you guys are going to be seeing people that you know their body fat isn't right, or you know that you can see that they're losing weight. So the more you understand about it, the better, because people will be they won't want to talk about it. But actually just a few questions to make someone start thinking about whether this weight is healthy for their performance is really good. And we tend to see in disordered eating almost like three voices in a head. So you have an eating disorder voice, and it's very well known in anorexia. You have that anorexic voice, and that's telling you must always be less. It's not about a number, it's about I need to be less than I am, I need to be smaller than I am. You have the cultural voice, and cycling is horrific for the absolute focus on leaner is faster. We must weigh as little as possible. We see things on Zwift of people kind of not being entirely honest about their weights and feeling like they can't be entirely honest about their weight. Everybody's putting their weight down a little bit, and then they need to in order to feel competitive. And then it almost gives you that number that you should be focused on. And there is so much focus on how lean people are, how low their body fat is, what their BMI percentage is, that we've created this awful culture where people are constantly trying to be less. And if you're not going down that route, there's something wrong with you. And then you have your own personal voice, that's the one where you want to be the best athlete you can be. And very rationally, you will know you need to fuel that, and you need to fuel it really well. But those other two voices are really loud. And once you've started with any type of eating disorder voice in there, it's very, very hard to quieten them. So I would never work with anyone with disordered eating who isn't also seeing a nutritionist and an endocrinologist, because you need to know what's going on inside as well. You need someone advising on the nutrition side. And even as a psychologist, it's quite scary working with somebody in that area, because in anorexia, 1 in 5 people will die with it. So I can absolutely see there's a real fear to get involved in any way. But actually, sometimes it's you guys that can make a real difference. So there's a great runner, a guy called Tom, who started off, he was in his mid-20s, started off running, did a 2:32 marathon, I think, as his first run, so phenomenally fast, and suddenly started to go, oh, maybe there could be something in this, maybe this is for me. And he went over to a training camp, I think in Kenya, and he was injured one day, so he wasn't training, and somebody by the pool literally said to him, if you lost a bit of weight, you'd be so much faster. And that is all it took. And there's a kind of a triad of personality types of being very sensitive, having high levels of anxiety, and being a perfectionist. And those will put you at high risk of disordered eating. And so if you're in that place already, because that's your personality, and you've got a goal that requires you to work really hard in a culture that is very weight focused, you can see why it just takes one comment for that to click in, if I need to weigh less. And he developed bulimia, and it was actually his dentist that got him to seek help. So his dentist said to him after an appointment, you need to see someone about your eating disorder, otherwise you will lose all your teeth, because he was throwing up and losing all the enamel. And that was what it took him. So actually a kind listening shoulder of no judgment, and maybe just a question that won't get any answer in there, but makes somebody think, maybe I need some help for this, can be really valuable. I can see there's some feedback from Amelia. Okay, so you'd feel grateful that somebody had approached it gently. I think because you guys are so trusted. As athletes, we give you our bodies when we're in a real dire state and just trust that you can help fix us. And so actually you're in a better position to do that than someone like me that gets brought in when somebody's at crisis point and they have no idea who I am or whether I'm going to judge or how I'm going to be. If you've been able to build up a good relationship, and it's in a very gentle, non-judgmental way of, do you feel you're fueling what you're doing enough right now? It's those little questions that can make you bring it to performance. So it's not a judgment about how somebody looks, but it's, are you fueling well enough to be able to recover properly? Because if somebody's got massive hormone deficiencies, they're not going to be able to recover particularly well. So the more we can make that performance voice louder, of how do we fuel well enough for your performance? How do we fuel you well enough to get better, to recover properly? And the piece you started with of worried about putting on weight while recovery, I was really pleased to see so many cycling coaches retweet that on Twitter angrily. This is not the way to do it. You need to fuel recovery. You need to refuel properly your body, rebuilding itself, building it stronger. The last thing you want to do is try and use that time to lose weight.
I think Dr. Stacey Sims has got a new paper out as well, because there were some comments that maybe the whole concept of energy availability hasn't really been looked at well in male cyclists. It has maybe been done quite well in female triathletes and female cyclists, but not male cyclists. And so, yeah, for anyone that's got access to Athens, etc., they might want to check that article out.
Yeah. A really great person to follow, she does some good stuff on Twitter, is Nikki Kaey, who is an endocrinologist that I will always refer people onto. And she's also the chief medical officer at Fourth Edge. So she will be the one that checks everybody's blood results as they go through there. But she's done specific research in male cyclists and looked at bone density specifically, and was able to actually catch some people whilst doing that research that had got into difficulties, who'd all kind of thought, well, I'm a man, I can't have a eating disorder, we don't have them. And actually, Red S used to be called female athlete triad, but then they realized that men get it just as much. So it got renamed, so it didn't have that same stigma to it. So it is something to look out for in both genders.
Absolutely. Okay, how are we doing on time? Coming up, almost approaching the hour. So I'll maybe sort of follow up on or go back slightly to an earlier point we were talking about regarding maybe that sort of pain interpretation, that mental strength, if it is mental strength. I had an interesting question actually from one of my undergraduate students last week regarding the language that we're using and talking about pain. You and I had a very brief Twitter follow-up on this one, but I'll maybe bring this up in this scenario because, again, if we're dealing with a cyclist and they've got an injury, they've got pain, and we know that language is really important about sort of how we're framing it. So what would your advice be regarding how much we focus on the pain? Because what the student was finding is athletes that he was working with, the sort of, as we would historically think, mentally strong, never bothered about pain. They're always saying, oh yeah, it feels absolutely fine. They would just sort of crack on. But particularly some of the much younger athletes who you're constantly going to and going, does that hurt? Does that hurt? Have you got any pain? And the fear was, are we reinforcing that they need to look for pain all the time? And that's a bad thing if they're feeling any pain, and trying to normalize that it's all right to feel some discomfort. And how do we kind of frame that if we're dealing with an athlete who's maybe coming back from injury?
I guess there's 2 points there. One is we really want athletes to know their own bodies. And actually, that's something you guys can really help them with. When you're working on somebody's body with them, you don't want to be asking about pain, but you do want them to start to describe what they're feeling in their body. And I find it even from the mental side. One of the activities I will do with athletes is getting them to notice where in their body they feel anxiety. And you kind of go, it's in your head. It's not. We have something called somatic anxiety. We can absolutely feel it in our body. And when we do this activity, they'll come out going, oh, it's in the back of my head, or mine's my bottom right hand side of my stomach. And when I feel it go, I literally can go and check my diary and go, what's coming up that's making me nervous? Because something's worrying me. So the more different parts we get to know our body is really helpful, because it might be that, yeah, when I start out on a run, I've always got a bit of a creaky Achilles. It's like, but if I know that it always lasts 5 minutes and I need to warm it up, well, that's okay. I can run through it and it's no problem. This never caused me an issue. If you don't know that, instantly there's a panic. Your chimp's out. I'm injured. There's a problem. Big drama. So helping people learn their own bodies and how they respond to different things is really valuable. And then you mentioned the word language. I think it's really important we help athletes understand the difference between discomfort and pain. Pain can sometimes be very helpful. And there's a great writer called Alex Hutchinson, who's got a brilliant book called Endure. It's the book I wish I'd written. It's fabulous. And it's all about different ways we help ourselves endure more. And he uses the phrase, pain is information. And I love that, because in some circumstances, you might be in pain and you need to just put up with it. If it's your big race of the year and you're in utter pain, but you've only got 5 miles to go and you're doing really well and you can have 3 months off afterwards, you might push through that pain and decide that, yes, it's giving me information, but I'm going to suck it up. Other times it might be pain that, oh, I can feel pain in my knee. I think my technique's wrong. So I can use that as information to go and get my technique looked at, to go and get my bike fit sorted. So see pain as information to, yeah, I need to rest. I need to fix something. Very occasionally, I need to suck it up and just take it. But what we will most often have in sport is discomfort. And we need discomfort if we're going to get better. If we're just going to go out and poodle around and have fun every time, wonderful, that's great for fitness, but it won't help performance. So getting used to discomfort, I think mentally, can be a good tactic of, I'm using this to get better. I know it hurts, but it means I'll be faster, I'll be a better athlete, no problem. But really being able to distinguish, is this discomfort? Is this pain?
Mm.
And pain will usually be more acute. So it's specific twinges, it's sharp.
Mm.
It comes suddenly. Discomfort will be much more when you can feel it in your heart and lungs as well. And so it's your whole body will give you some level of discomfort. Pain will come from something quite more acute. And so the more you practice using those, discomfort I suck up, pain I use as information to find out if I need to do something a bit differently.
It's that mindfulness, isn't it? And becoming more aware of our body and using those techniques.
It's the one area. So when I originally wrote the book, there was no section on self-awareness. So in it, it's 9 chapters of the things we most often see and 64 strategies that you might use. But they're all, the strategies are in like 5 different sections. And there was no section for self-awareness. And it was as I was writing it and seeing more and more clients, it became so much more important. And actually the book I'm just finishing at the moment is looking at the 10 pillars of success. So they're psychological pillars that some of us luckily have them naturally within our personality, but all of them you can develop yourself. And one of those pillars is, I call it internal insight. It's self-awareness. When we know ourselves truly and we listen to it, we've got so much more power than when we bury our heads and just pretend stuff's not happening.
When's that book coming out then? Have you finished it yet?
It's an audio book.
Okay.
And no, I haven't finished it. I'm interviewing people within it at the moment. So it's coming out in April.
Okay, very good.
Hopefully.
I know you had another book out not so long ago as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so that was the psychology of exercise. So that's designed for, I guess, anyone working to get, not really our athletes, but regular people who should be doing more exercise, looking at the benefits of exercise, mentally, cognitively, physically, what the barriers tend to be in each age group. So it's broken down for children, teens, adults, retirees, and those with long-term health conditions, and how the theories and the actual techniques we would use to get them in there. But there is a chapter in there on exercise addiction. That's something that's not covered very much, and it's almost like a badge of honor in some areas that I do more and more and more. And yeah, my wife divorced me because the amount of training I was doing, and actually it can really destroy relationships and jobs and cause you a huge amount of injuries when you're continually overtraining on a body that can't take it anymore. So that might be a helpful chapter for people.
Couple of last minute questions if anybody wants to add in anything in the chat box. Gillian put a comment in there about sort of coming from a rowing background into cycling, and maybe that cultural weight management, losing weight is maybe a sort of predisposition. Is that sort of psychological?
It's really tough because the predispositions we see in people with conditions like anorexia almost entirely match those personality traits we see in elite athletes. So perfectionism, sensitivity, drive, determination, they're so similar that you can absolutely see why people get into real trouble. So you really need people in those teams who are incredibly aware of the risks and look out for things before they get down a route that's very difficult to control.
And that's why the language matters, isn't it? The words we use really matters. And then Amelia's followed up with any strategies for dealing with seeing other people's successes, or for example, do we need to be coming off Strava and coming off social media to avoid seeing what everyone else is doing? I know I was sort of, again, I mentioned this, I was a bit injured over the summer, so I stopped looking at what people were doing on Strava. My sessions were still getting uploaded, but I just wouldn't go on and look at seeing everybody else's. And I don't know, have you got anything to add into that one, Josie?
I won't use Strava, and I advise many of my athletes not to, because that sense of comparison, and when your self-worth is built into your sport and you can't do your sport, every time you look at it, it's like a little stab to the heart of what you can't do. Look at me, I'm doing this, you can't. You'd love to be doing this. So why put yourself through that pain? So I often say, stay on social media for the stuff you love and you do get from it, but don't unfollow people because you might lose friends, but mute people. So just go through and mute all those people that are putting up what they've been doing and that upset you, because social media should enhance our life. It absolutely shouldn't make us feel awful. So just, I call it, I think in the book, like a social media audit, but really audit how you use your technology. So am I uploading everything to Strava so I can compare myself to others? Does that help me? If it does, brilliant. If it's a great determination or a drive, go for it. Actually, if I'm using it as a great big stick to beat myself up with, why do it? So look through social media of what are the benefits, what do I get from it? Particularly things like if you've got any disordered eating, scrolling through and seeing the perfect body of an influencer that's taken 40 pictures to find the right one, or the salad somebody else is eating for dinner. It's just making yourself miserable. And especially the last year, life's been tough enough. We don't want to make it any tougher. So yes, get on Strava.
Yeah. Right, we've ticked over the hour there, and Josie, I'm well aware that you've been awake for far too many hours today.
I was complaining on Twitter this morning. My daughter woke me up at 4:36.
Ouch. Yeah. So I think if there's any other questions that want to roll through, I know we've got a very slight delay on the line, but we'll give it a few seconds for anybody to stick anything else in the chat box. Obviously, Bianca's put up there your website, so I know you've got a lot of free resources on there, so get people to explore that. You've got some other videos and webinars that you've delivered recently. You did one on sort of strategies to deal with just lockdown, although hopefully we're coming out of this current lockdown, but goodness knows if we've got another one coming. We'll see what happens. But yeah, you've got lots of really good stuff on there, so I'd encourage people to explore your website. I'll plug it again. I mean, I think this book is brilliant. That's really helped me in my clinical practice and in my coaching practice. I use that on a regular basis. Lots of highlights all over the place. Where's the best for people to sort of contact you on or follow you on social media? Is it your Twitter, or do you
my Instagram's full of pictures of my daughter, which would be very dull. But yeah, I'm always on Twitter, which is Josephine Perry. Or there's my email's on my contact page. So just get in touch.
Fantastic. So yeah, if anybody needs any further help or needs anybody to refer to, then do get in touch.
Cool.
Okay, doesn't look like there's any other questions coming through. Bianca, is there anything you want to finish off with?
No, I think you've covered things comprehensively, Josie, so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you very much for your time tonight. That was really good and a really important topic for us to all to explore and just raise the conversation around these parts. Yeah, great stuff.
Brilliant. On that note, we will leave you all to it. Thank you.